Hey guys, my name is Sean, and this is going to be another cEDH review of Modern Horizons. Today I'm going to go over the top 5 artifacts slash enchantments. Thank you guys for watching, and hope you enjoy. Our first card is Out of Time. This is an enchantment for 1 white white, and when Out of Time enters the battlefield, untap all creatures and phase them out until Out of Time leaves the battlefield. Put a time counter Out of Time for each creature phased out this way. Then has Vanishing. So it's very similar to Toxic Deluge as a three mana basically board wipe. Board wipes don't necessarily see play in cEDH outside of Toxic Deluge and a few control decks like Tasigur, but I think Out of Time has some potential for other reasons. It hits stuff like Opposition Agent and the other key creatures you want to deal with. Hits stuff like Archon of Emeria, all those problem stacks pieces, but it also hits commanders, unlike Toxic Deluge. Say in the case of Urza, you Toxic Deluge, you kill a few creatures, you get rid of Urza. You spend your turn doing that, and then your opponent spends their next turn just replaying Urza. So you basically spent your turn doing something, and then they just spent their turn rebuilding what they already had. But Out of Time kind of does the opposite of that. Out of Time, you make it so the way phasing works is when they phase out, commanders cannot be put then back into the command zone. So when they're phased out, they're basically just out of the game. So if you're in a controlled deck, you can get rid of someone's commander, whether it be like Urza for a combo or stacks, whatever it may be. Urza is kind of the main driving force of the deck, and getting rid of commanders is very important and can slow a lot of strategies down. And with the large number of dorks, you can kind of always hit like 3 or 4, which is pretty nice. Like Birds of Paradise, Llanowar Elves, all that classic dork stuff. You can kind of hit those like 3, 4, 5 verse counters. And maybe you're playing some dorks or something because you're in like a banned control deck or something like that. But if you're in one of these controlling strategies, the dorks just allow you to basically hit more creatures and keep the commanders off the board for more turns, which is pretty nice. It is exposed to like things like Force of Vigor, but I think the big thing is you are playing a control deck, so you should have access to some sort of counterspell to protect it. And I think it's really going to be good against problem commanders, like if you're playing a lot of commander-centric strategies, or you're playing very heavy stacks or other heavy creature-based decks like Birthing Pod lists or stuff like that, or like something like a Nagila, where creatures are very important. Then there's like one cool synergy that's probably has no relevance though, is like Solemnity, just because if you're playing this card with Solemnity, it just exiles them forever unless it's dealt with. The vanishing doesn't really matter, but I don't think the vanishing matters that much as long as it's like 3, 4, or 5 or higher. But still, this is just a cool thing you can do. Definitely not a cEDH thing because it's going to be very expensive to do. And it takes up an additional slot in your deck. And this card, probably going to see play in some control decks. And especially maybe if the meta shifts to more creature-based strategies, this card will see more play, but I think right now it's just going to be seeing some play in some control decks. At number 4, we have Dermotaxi. It's a artifact vehicle for 2 mana. It has imprint as Dermotaxi enters the battlefield. Exile creature card from a graveyard. Tap 2 untap creatures you control until end of turn. Dermotaxi becomes a copy of the exiled card, except it's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types. So the first thing, if you're playing cards like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, you're playing these dorks, you're almost going to always be able to tap 2 untapped creatures you control to do this, to get Dermotaxi out, or to activate Dermotaxi's ability. So if you're playing a deck with a lot of small creatures, then Dermotaxi is pretty good. The first cool thing is that it kind of acts like a counter spell on non-blue decks, or like, because say you have 4 mana, enough mana to complete the Snoop combo, or you know your opponent can basically play, they can counter your Snoop, but you can play Dermotaxi as a way to, if they don't counter Dermotaxi, you imprint Snoop. If they do counter Dermotaxi, then you just cast Snoop afterwards. So it's like a cool way to protect your combos, but the big thing is this card in Reanimator style decks. Because say you imprint a Razaketh, as long as you have 2 creatures out, now you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control, and until end of turn, Dermotaxi becomes a copy of Razaketh. Then you can execute your Razaketh line the way you typically would execute it. So it's kind of a cool thing because it turns cards like Vampiric Tutor. So say you have either one of these in your hand, it turns Vampiric Tutor into now a way to just grab your combo piece and kind of put it into play. It gives you more copies. It makes it, you need Entomb less now, which is kind of cool too. and you're less reliant on the graveyard. You don't have to go tutor for like Cabal Therapy, put that into your graveyard if you like. You know, if you have that in your hand, and then to play that to target yourself to then discard your reanimation piece, then reanimate it. So it kind of gets around some steps where if you get it into hand, you can just tutor for Dermotaxi and then play Dermotaxi. It does require a lot of creatures in play, so you have to be playing a deck that plays multiple creatures because you have to tap two untap creatures just to make it into play. But it's a cool way that also avoids rest in peace effects. So it's a cool way to do with your reanimation spells. I think it might see some play in certain reanimator decks just because, especially, like it's not going to see play with World Gorge Dragon, both stuff like Razaketh, or if you make it a copy, it just has a bunch of good, powerful activated abilities. You do, the biggest problem is you exile it, and if Dermotaxi gets removed, obviously you can't get it back. But it's probably a risk that you are going to be willing to take if you're playing this card. Our next card is Void Mirror. I talked about this a while back, and it's a artifact for 2. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So it obviously hits off if your opponent's playing Kozilek. This is not the card they want to face, but most people do not play these Kozilek or other monocolored decks. But it really does shut off Chrome Mox, any 0 mana artifact, any 0 mana artifact such as Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Jewel Lotus. Any 0 mana artifact is shut off, which can really slow down a lot of turbo strategies. Then also shuts off all free interactions, such as Force of Will or something like a Deflecting Swat, because no mana was spent to cast them, which means no colored mana was spent to cast them. So it shuts off anything they're casting for 0 or for free with an alternate cost. It's kind of like a defense grid effect in that way because if you're it basically makes it so that your opponents really can't interact at instant speed for free anymore. They have to pay additional mana. They have to hard cast things, or they have to, in defense grid's case, pay additional mana. So it kind of makes it so it's hard to interact at instant speed with free interaction. I think this deck could see play in a lot of this card could see play in a lot of stacks decks, especially like Thalia, like creature-based stacks decks, because a lot of times those mono white, those green white, or white red, whatever color they're in, they don't normally play a lot of instant speed free interaction because it's not available in their colors. But this just gives them a way to deal with it even better. Could also see some play with decks that play like Spear of Resistance, Thorn of Amethyst effects, like typical other stacks builds, because this is just another way to slow down the decks that have free interaction that you do not want to deal with, which is pretty powerful. At number 2, we have Urzas Saga. It's an artifact. It's an enchantment land that has. Its first is Urzas Saga gains add 1. Second is Urzas Saga gains tap, pay 2. Create a 0/0 colors construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And then 3, search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So that obviously just creates the construct token, which if you've ever played against Urza or any other deck that utilizes Urza or another card that creates these constructs, in slow, grindy matches, especially stacks matches, the construct is a viable way to beat your opponents down as the game slowly progresses. So it's always nice to have more creatures that get bigger as the more artifacts you play. And then his third ability basically baselines is the Soul Ring, Chrome Mox, Mox Diamond. Maybe you even want to grab Lotus Petal or Jewel Lotus. Whatever you do want it to be, it baselines is stuff like that, which is pretty good. And then say you're playing some deck like Cole the Forge Master. Like in specific strategies it gets even better because say in the case of Cole, now you can just grab Skull Clamp more easily. In the case of say another deck, maybe you want to grab your Esper Sentinel or something like that, one of the new creatures printed in Modern Horizons. Is in specific decks there's a lot more examples of cards that you can grab. The sky's the limit kind of with this card because there's a lot of powerful artifacts at 0 and 1 mana. There's even Graveyard H, there's Tormod's Crypt if you need like interaction. It provides a lot of value at the land spot, which is nice. It does fade away after 3 turns, but I think it's still good. Good and Isochron Scepter decks can get your 0 and 1 mana artifacts, get your Mana Crypt that you need to untap your Scepter. Good in Tidesbound Tyrant for the same reason. Get those 0 and 1 mana artifacts that you use to go infinite mana. Even cool with Rograss and Roga. You can just grab Mox Amber, make it into a Mox Ruby combination. But I think its biggest problem is a lot of the Turbo Nos decks and a lot of the fast decks in general. This card is very slow because you have to play it. You have to wait we have to wait to the second turn, 2 turns after you play it for the third ability to kick in, and then you lose it. So you can tap it in response though to add mana, but you still end up losing it to get an artifact. So it is a little bit slow, but I think in combo decks where artifacts are key to the winning the game, I think this card's going to have a lot of power, very powerful. And then say like Urza, which I mentioned again, another and just artifact based strategy is going to like this card too. Maybe it's not a straight combo deck, but it's a deck that relies on artifacts. It's going to want this card. And at number 1 we have Dress Down. It's a enchantment for 1 and a blue with flash. Now when Dress enters the battlefield, draw a card. Creatures lose all abilities. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Dress Down. So it's basically like they put humility in blue at flash and you draw a card. So for all those people who have complained that cEDH players don't play Stifle as a way to deal with Oracle, they now have a card that basically shuts that down, and it's just inherently a lot better because it stops all creatures for that turn. And creature-based win cons are pretty common at the moment. There's another 2-card combo like Witherbloom Apprentice Chain of Smog. There's a lot of combos that are creature reliant, any Kiki combos, Snoop combos. A lot of decks rely on even like Reanimator style combos. Decks just typically rely on combos that feature at least 1 creature, and it shuts all those down. And as I said, the first main one is Thassa's Oracle. You basically respond with the Thassa's Oracle with this. Creatures lose all abilities. The ability doesn't trigger anymore. So then they don't get the trigger, and then they can't win the game. And now their Oracle is on the board. And unless they have a way to either reanimate it or put it back into their hand to recast, they basically can't win the game from here. So it also counters stuff like Dockside Extortionist. If you don't want your opponents to get a bunch of treasures, you can cast this, and then they don't get the treasures when it enters the battlefield, which is also pretty powerful because you'll slow down their strategy, whatever they're going for. Good against Kiki Jiki combos, you can respond to those with this again. The creatures now don't have any abilities, so they don't untap Kiki Jiki, which means the combo doesn't work anymore. So just once again, another way to stop another powerful creature combo. It also shuts down a lot of commanders like Najeela. Say your opponent's about to win with Najeela, you can do this. Creatures lose all abilities. Now, Najeela has neither of her abilities, so she doesn't get the warrior token, and she can't use the second ability to and pay the Wooburg to get the combo. Also, it shuts down things like Thrasios, so it shuts down any commander that win con where you say you have infinite mana. When you can respond to your opponent getting infinite mana, dressing down. Now they can't use Thrasios as their infinite mana outlet, so now they just have infinite mana and have to win with what's in their hand. So it shuts down a ton of combos at instant speed in blue, and then the best part is it does go away at the end of turn like something like Underworld Breach does, but it replaces itself. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So if you do successfully resolve this card, you get a card back. So it's a strong piece of interaction that deals with a lot of combos that also gets you another card back. So it's basically paying for itself and stopping your opponents from winning the game. So it sets you up to win by drawing you a card and then stops your opponents from winning the game. It's kind of like they combined a bad cantrip onto this card in addition to its already incredibly powerful abilities. So that's going to be the top 5 artifacts and enchantments. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.